2 months after setting sail on his second expedition to the New World in September of 1493, the legendary explorer Christopher Columbus laid eyes on a small, mysterious island rising from the Caribbean Sea. He named it Dominica, after the Latin word for Sunday, the day he first spotted its shores. But long before Columbus ever arrived, this island already had a story, one written by the people who called it home for thousands of years.
The people Columbus encountered were known as the Kalinagos, but their roots ran far deeper than any European record could capture. Their ancestry traced back through at least 3 separate waves of migration, spanning thousands of years. The first known tribe, the Albatroids, sailed from the east coast of South America approximately 4,000 years ago, settling on the island and living there for roughly 2,500 years, before another tribe, the Arawaks, arrived under similar circumstances, crossing the sea to make Dominica their home. In the early 1400s, less than a century before Columbus arrived, another tribe invaded the Caribbean, violently assimilating with the descendants of the Arawaks. Together, they became known as the Kalinagos. As Europe pushed deeper into the Americas during the colonial era, the Kalinagos enforced a zero-tolerance policy toward any settlers who attempted to land. The few Europeans who managed to reach the island shores quickly learned to avoid it altogether. A dangerous fusion of dense central jungles, towering mountains, active volcanoes, and untamed wildlife protected the island like a natural fortress.
Early in the 1500s, African slaves brought to the region by European colonizers began fleeing coastal camps, escaping into the island's much-feared interior forests. The Kalinagos tolerated their presence, and over time, a mutually beneficial relationship developed between the two peoples. Ironically, the Kalinagos' fearsome reputation among both the French and English became an unexpected shield, preventing Dominica's indigenous population from suffering the same fate of enslavement that befell so many other tribes across the Americas.
By the 1600s, the Kalinagos began allowing limited European access to the coasts. English woodcutters settled in the west, while French woodcutters established themselves in the east. As more Europeans arrived, more enslaved Africans fled inland, joining fortified communities of runaway slaves that Europeans came to call the Maroons. Word spread across the Caribbean of runaway slaves finding freedom on this obscure little island. But the Maroons remained few in number, and Dominica's treacherous jungles discouraged any serious European search efforts. In the late 1600s, a free black man from the French colony of Martinique arrived in Dominica and saw its lack of development as a rare business opportunity. After securing permission from the Kalinagos, he relocated his family and founded the island's first plantation, staffed with African slaves. By 1660, both England and France, locked in a period of rapid colonial expansion, agreed to keep Dominica officially neutral. For nearly a century and a half, this fragile balance defined life on the island, as both European powers quietly used its resources. Everything changed in 1761, during the 7 Years' War, when British forces invaded Roseau, a French settlement on Dominica's coast, a direct violation of the island's long-standing neutrality. 2 years later, in 1763, the Treaty of Paris formally ended Dominica's neutral status, placing the island firmly under British rule. A new chapter of colonial control had begun, and with it, a far darker economic system was about to take hold. With Dominica now firmly under British control, colonists established a vast plantation economy built almost entirely on enslaved labor. Sugar and coffee became the colony's most valuable exports. French residents who had already settled were permitted to remain, provided they paid taxes to the British Crown, though they remained under constant suspicion. Still, they enjoyed far greater privileges than the island's free black population,
who were barred from owning land and had no meaningful voice in politics. Conditions were harshest of all for the enslaved Africans, who made up the overwhelming majority of Dominica's population and endured brutal, unrelenting working and living conditions. As time passed, increasing numbers of enslaved Africans risked everything to escape into the island's dense forests. Their growing presence alarmed plantation owners, prompting the colonial government to offer rewards for the capture and return of runaway slaves. Those recaptured faced severe punishment, while any free person, black or white, caught helping them escape faced harsh penalties of their own. Meanwhile, the ongoing wars between France and Britain deepened the tension that hung over every corner of the colony. Then, on the night of August 6, 1778, several French settlers hosted a lavish party and invited the local British garrison to join them for drinks. The British soldiers accepted, unaware of what awaited them. The next morning, while British troops were still recovering from the night's celebration, a French army landed on Dominica's shores. Caught completely off guard, British Governor William Stewart had no choice but to surrender. Life under French rule changed little for most of Dominica's population. Still, the arrival of newly enslaved Africans slowed, and the French government invested in improving the island's infrastructure. But that progress was short-lived. Devastating hurricanes struck in 1779 and 1780, wiping out much of what had been built. These disasters, combined with the island's unstable political climate, pushed many wealthy British settlers to abandon Dominica altogether. Only the poorer settlers, lacking the means to leave, remained behind, as maroon raids on remaining British plantations grew increasingly frequent. Attacks the French authorities quietly tolerated, believing a weakened British planter class strengthened their own control. Everything shifted on April 12, 1782, when Britain decisively defeated France at the Battle of the Saints, the largest naval battle ever fought in the Caribbean. With this victory, Dominica was returned once again to British rule, setting the stage for a new and determined colonial administration. In 1784, the British returned to Dominica and re-established colonial government. Captain John Ord, a seasoned Royal Navy commander, was appointed governor. One of his earliest priorities was confronting the growing threat posed by the Maroons. In 1785, he formed a militia known as the Legion, tasked with eliminating Maroon resistance entirely. But despite their conventional military training, the Legion was utterly unprepared for guerrilla warfare deep within Dominica's dense, unforgiving jungles. And the campaign's early stages ended in repeated defeat. The tide eventually turned after British forces captured several Maroons, reportedly including women and children, and interrogated them for information. The intelligence gathered revealed the locations of numerous Maroon camps, along with the whereabouts of their leader, Chief Bala. As a result, many escaped slaves were recaptured. Though the Maroons were never fully destroyed, their resistance had been effectively broken. In the aftermath, the British used the conflict as justification to suppress African cultural influence across the colony. Yet in 1788, a series of reforms improved conditions for enslaved people, while free blacks were granted additional rights, including land ownership and greater economic opportunity. By the late 1700s, Dominica had become one of the most attractive destinations for free black people across the Caribbean, offering more legal rights and opportunities than any other colony in the region. A growing class of mulatto merchants, free people of mixed African and European ancestry who identified more closely with French culture than with their African roots, began settling on the island in significant numbers. But these expanded rights weren't simply acts of generosity. They served a calculated purpose, discouraging both enslaved Africans and free blacks from embracing their African heritage, making rebellion against the colonial system less likely. Among the most notable figures of this era was Jean-Louis Apollinaire. His father descended from French settlers, while his mother had been an African slave. Deeply influenced by the ideals of the French Revolution and the Enlightenment, Apollinaire became convinced that the people of Dominica deserved far greater freedom and justice. On New Year's Day, 1791, he organized a slave uprising. The rebels initially demanded better living conditions and more free time, but when Governor Ord rejected their demands outright, the situation quickly spiraled into violence. In response, Governor Ord deployed both British regiments and the Black Rangers to crush the revolt, offering a reward for Apollinaire's capture, a reward that, to the surprise of many in the colony, was ultimately claimed by Kalinago supporters. The rebellion was brought to a brutal end. Captured rebels faced a series of public executions, culminating in the hanging of Jean-Louis Apollinaire himself in March 1791, witnessed by hundreds. The swift, highly public nature of these executions sent an unmistakable warning to every enslaved person in Dominica. Rebellion against British authority would be met with ruthless punishment. News of the revolt reached London in late March, just weeks before a planned parliamentary debate on the ethics of the global slave trade, and the reports from Dominica strengthened the arguments of those opposed to abolition. Governor Ord was summoned to London to answer for his handling of the revolt. Though cleared of any abuse of authority, he chose not to return to Dominica, retiring from the governorship to resume his naval career, eventually rising to admiral, and in 1807 winning election to the House of Commons. In 1793, renewed war between Britain and France further inflamed tensions across the colony. By 1805, a force of 3,500 French troops invaded once again, looting Roseau and burning it to the ground before withdrawing with their plunder, rather than attempting to reclaim the island. As the British began the difficult task of rebuilding, a devastating hurricane struck, flooding Roseau's riverbanks and killing at least 131 people. In 1807, the British Empire officially abolished the slave trade, though those already enslaved remained bound to their owners, with full emancipation still decades away. In 1813, George Robert Ainsley was appointed governor and offered the Maroons amnesty in exchange for surrender. After centuries of hostility, the Maroons had little reason to trust him. They reportedly returned his peace envoys with their hearts ripped out. Ainsley responded with a bounty on the Maroon chief, only to find a counter notice offering an even larger reward for his own head. As Ainsley mobilized his forces, a powerful hurricane struck in the summer of 1813, followed weeks later by a massive flood. Believing the Maroons had suffered just as severely, Ainsley dispatched troops into the flooded jungles and systematically destroyed every Maroon camp on the island, a campaign many would later describe as a war of extermination. Governor Ainsley's brutal campaign sparked widespread outrage in London, leading to his removal, though many of Dominica's white and free black residents regarded him as a hero. Frequent hurricanes throughout the 1820s and 1830s deepened the colony's hardships, weakening the planter class's grip on power. In 1831, non-white citizens finally gained the right to participate in politics, leading to the elections of 1836 and Dominica's first all-black government. In 1834, slavery was officially abolished across the British Empire, freeing 14,175 enslaved people overnight, though for many, freedom brought little real change, as former slaves remained tied to the same plantations for nearly a century more. Economic reform in the 1940s and the rise of the banana industry in the 1950s brought new opportunity. Universal suffrage arrived in 1951, the first political party formed in 1955, and in 1967, Dominica became a self-governing associated state. Finally, on November 3, 1978, Dominica achieved full independence. Today, its 72,000 citizens carry forward the legacy of the Colonial, the Maroons, the Europeans, and the enslaved Africans who shaped this island. A nation that continues to endure, as it did in 2017, when Hurricane Maria destroyed roughly 90% of the island. For the people of Dominica, the next storm is never a question of if, but when. And that is the extraordinary, hard-fought story of Dominica, an island shaped by resistance, survival, and resilience across centuries of struggle. From the ancient Kalinago voyagers to the Maroons who carved out freedom in the jungle, from the chains of colonial rule to the triumph of independence. Dominica's history is a powerful reminder of the human spirit's refusal to be broken. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. What part of Dominica's journey surprised you the most? Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves history, and subscribe so you never miss the next incredible story we uncover. There are so many more hidden histories waiting to be told. So stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next one.